Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our Tax Talk show. It is a pleasure to be with you as always, and I'm always happy whenever I know I'm bringing you some information that you need to know. Like we said, we want you to have financial freedom, but not just freedom, but also peace of mind. So when you go file your taxes, you need to know what's going on inside your taxes so that you don't have issues where you were audited and you didn't know. The law is if you file your tax return and you sign the return, whatever is on your return, you're also responsible for it. So that's why you need to be an informed taxpayer. So when you go to somebody to file your return, you know what they put in your tax return. And we talked about filing statuses, and I recently talked about married filing separately. Now we're going to take some time to talk about the head of household filing status. It's a very great status because it gives you a very substantial advantage over somebody who's filing single, for example. Remember, while we were talking about the married filing separately, we said that the standard deduction for single taxpayer is 12,400. So standard deduction for a head of household taxpayer is $18,650. So it is very important to know the difference and to know what you can and cannot claim. And you also need to know when and how does someone become a head of household person. So we say for someone to be qualified as head of household, you need to have a qualifying child or a qualifying relative. And you also need to have provided more than half the cost of keeping up a home. So what does it mean to keep up a home? So it is when you take all the expenses, you add the total cost, did you pay more than half the cost? For example, things that you can put in would be rent, mortgage interest, insurance, utility, property taxes, food that is being consumed in the house, and other household expenses like medical payments and transportation do not count as costs for keeping up a home. But if you incur more than 50% of those costs, then that's one step towards being head of household. There's one exception. Let's say that there's many people that put money together. If you pay more than anybody else, even though you do not spend 50%, you still qualify as a head of household. But another thing that you need to know is you need to have a qualifying child or qualifying relative. And we will briefly describe qualifying child, and if we get people who request that we go a little deeper into who is a qualifying child, we go there. But we say you need a qualifying child. To have a qualifying child, the qualifying child need to satisfy 5 separate tests. A lot of places they say 4, but I say they all 5. One test is the age requirement. A qualifying child must be somebody who's under 19 or under 24 if that child is a full-time student for at least 5 months during the year. And so that's being a qualifying, that's one way. That's the age requirement. Under 19, if they just regular kids, not going to college, but if they are over 19, they still qualify you as far as age is concerned if they are a full-time student. So that's the age. The other requirement is citizenship. For someone to be a qualifying child, they must be a resident of the United States, Canada, or Mexico. So that's the citizenship test. You have residency tests, meaning where did the child reside? A qualifying child must have lived with you for at least 6 months during the year. So for you to claim a child, under the head of household status, the child must have lived with you for at least 6 months. So now, what happened if the child, you have cases where I've had people ask me, okay, but my daughter or my son is in college and they spent the whole year on campus. Do they qualify me as a qualifying child? This is considered what we call temporary absences. So if a child is away in college because they could not be home, they are still considered living with you the whole year. So what happened in the case where somebody lived or was born or died during the year? So if somebody dies during the year, let's say somebody dies January 2nd, does that child qualify you as for head of household? So even though it was only 2 days, but during the whole time that the child was alive during 2020, they live with you the whole time. So that's considered that they live with you the whole time. The whole time during the year, you also qualify for head of household status. How about if a child is born on December 31st, 11:59, only 1 minute alive? Well, that child is also considered to have been with you the whole year, because for the whole life of that child, they live with you, which was 1 minute in 2020. There's a case where a child is what they call stillborn. So if a child is born and dies right after, as long as the doctors or the nurses can certify that the child was born alive and died a few minutes later, that child qualifies you as a dependent for head of household status. But if the child is still born, meaning the child came out dead, then that doesn't qualify you as a head of household. But of course, these are extreme cases, and sometimes I hate to talk about cases like this where you have a parent. If that is somebody's case, that will bring them bad memories, but we're just trying to inform you not to make you relive those memories. So, and who can be your qualifying child? A qualifying child must be related to you by blood or adoption. So or it's the child was placed with you maybe by a court, or the child is related to you through marriage. So who can be your qualifying child? Your son, your daughter, your stepchild, your son-in-law, daughter-in-law, a foster child that was placed with you in your house, and you have also lineal descendant of all these people that we mentioned. A lineal descendant is anybody who is a son or daughter of these people that I mentioned. For example, your brother's child is gonna be either your nephew or your niece, and that child also qualifies you, is a qualifying child. One difference, your cousin, your little cousin, is not your qualifying child. Unfortunately, that's a qualifying relative. Again, you're gonna find tax preparers that's gonna say, well, you say it's your cousin, but I'm gonna put on the paper that's your nephew, because if you say cousin, you don't get earned income credit for that child. But if you get audited, the IRS is going to want to see a lot of things. One of those things is sometimes school records. That shows that the child lived with you in the same house, in your residence for 6 months, for at least 6 months. So you have to be careful. Now, remember, we say qualifying child must live with you at least 6 months. And another test, I don't think I mentioned that, is also support. The support test for qualifying child is different than the support test for a qualifying relative. So for a qualifying relative, you must have provided 50% of the support for that person. So you must have spent at least 50% of what it took for that person to for their support. But for a qualifying child, it's different. The child can, you don't have to necessarily spend more than 50% of the child, but that child cannot have provided more than 50% of their own support. Let me give you an example. Remember that child, Macaulay Culkin, who played Home Alone 2, at 7 or 8 years old, he was already a millionaire. So he was making more money than his parents. His parents, even though they were the one that received the money, but the money was earned by the child, so they could not claim him as their qualifying child because he was provided more than 50% of his own support. I hope I make that clear. So now we say, who's a qualifying relative? So if you have a child that's over, let me just go back 1 second. We say a person must be either 18, under 19, or under 24 if they are a full-time student. I did not mention that you could also have somebody that's much older, 50 years old. You can still claim them as your qualifying child if they have a permanent disability. So if somehow a doctor can certify that they are disabled, and sometimes it's easy to know if they are receiving social security disability because they have a certain disability that's permanent. So it doesn't matter what age the child is, as long as they are your child, you can still claim them as a qualifying child. So again, sorry, I almost missed that part. So now, qualifying relative. People say, oh, my son turned 19, so I can't claim my son anymore. That is wrong. You can still claim your son, but he's not your qualifying child. He's your qualifying relative. If he's 19 but he's not a full-time student, he becomes your qualifying child. So your parents, your mom, your dad, your father-in-law, your mother-in-law, your stepdad, stepmom, your brothers, your sisters, all of these people, your aunt, your uncle, they can all be your qualifying relative. So, and sometimes you hear a lot of people, even on the internet, or just looking, they say, oh, somebody must live with you at least 6 months during the year. That is not so for qualifying relative. If a qualifying relative is related to you by blood, meaning son, daughter, mom, dad, uncle, aunt, they don't have to live with you at all. They can be anywhere in the world. As long as you support them, you pay more than 50% of their support, they are your qualifying relative.